Let's
Go!
Start.
Hey.
Ver
Shen.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to episode 3 of Let's CoStaRt, a conversation with the Council of State Representatives from UVSA-Midwest. If you haven't seen our latest and previous episode on sexual and cultural identities, be sure to check it out on Spotify or YouTube. In the last episode, we talked about our personal relations to sexual and gender identities, experiences in expressing, repressing these identities, and their interplay with the Asian culture and identity. Today, we'll dive into our topic of standing together in our communities. To start off intros for today's episode, my name is Jennifer Au, my pronouns are she, her, hers, and I am an incoming senior at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, serving as the Nebraska State Representative for UVSA-Midwest.
Hello everyone, my name is Kang Fan. I'm the CoStaRt from Indiana, and I use he, him, his pronouns, and I'm a medical student at IUSM, and I was one of the co-hosts for the last 2 episodes too. So if you haven't seen those episodes, be sure to check them out.
Welcome back, everyone. I am Maya Powers. I use she, her, hers pronouns, and I'm a rising senior at UIC as well as the Illinois State Representative. And I want to introduce you guys to our today's guest speaker. Her name is Elizabeth Dang, and she's from UVSA-Midwest Executive Board. So why don't you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about the work that you do?
Sure thing. So hi, everyone. My name is Elizabeth Dang, she, her, hers, and I'm currently a second-year master's in higher education student at Loyola University, Chicago. Currently going into my second/last year of my term as president of UVSA Midwest. And I've spent a lot of time during my term working with my executive board and board of directors and the various internal staff that we have to promote a safe community in our spaces.
So for those of you who are new to this space, we started this podcast in order to create like a safe space between all of us to talk about life and school and community and identity and, you know, everything in between. And we wanted to use this platform as a way to like empower each other's narratives and to destigmatize what it means to be Vietnamese American, Asian American, or like just a person going through life in general. So hopefully all of you guys can resonate with us and vibe out with us today.
Yeah, and for sure, as usual, if you haven't seen our previous episodes yet, we do have disclaimer and trigger warnings. So anything that is said during this podcast are the views and experiences of the individual speakers and of us and our views, and they don't reflect UVSA Midwest as a whole. So the topics that we will be discussing may be personal and sensitive to some individuals, and some trigger warnings, for example, would be about racism, hate crimes, violence and abuse, etc.
All right. Speaking of the last 2 episodes, they revolved around our theme of identity. And now we will be talking about a monthly theme, which is community, which revolves around this episode. And then our next episode, episode 4, and they'll highlight topics related to our theme with, as today's episode, our topic is going to be talking about standing together in our communities, Asian hate in the U.S., and also community safety. And you know, before we get into this episode, I really do important to note that the rise of Asian hate crimes during COVID, as defined by the FBI, hate crimes are those that are acted upon primarily because of the victim's race, color, religion, or nationality. And hate crimes against Asians in the U.S., such as the Atlanta shooter who, quote, had a security camera showing innocent Asians being assaulted with, you know, bystanders ignoring them, and other heinous crimes against Asians in the last year and a half have really gained notoriety. And some of this hatred, in my opinion, you know, could be attributed to some people's personal views about the pandemic, that, you know, that China brought about COVID, that Asians should be blamed for lockdowns all over the world, etc. But, you know, I think it's extremely important that one thing that gets lost in all of that is the fact that, you know, ever since Asians started immigrating into the States way like over centuries ago, you know, we've been discriminated against for our customs, our race, our culture. Pretty much we've been discriminated by the fact that we were just different than the white majority living in the US at the time. And we honestly still are being discriminated against. And, you know, that, like I said, that sentiment still exists today. Japanese Americans were sent to internment camps just 75, 80 years ago during World War II. and the Ku Klux Klan attacked and they attack minorities that include Asians since their peak in the 1960s with the Civil Rights Movement. And now today it's a big issue. According to the Stop AAPI Hate Initiative, from March 2020 to around February 2021, so right at the start of COVID to February this year, there have been documented 3,800 anti-Asian hate crimes and incidents in the nation. So, the reality is racism and discrimination against Asians didn't start because of COVID. They've just been brought to realization along with racism against other minorities that has persisted since the birth of our nation. And, personally for me, I've also had the fortune of not being the target of a defined hate crime, but as most Asian Americans can attest, I have been subject to, multiple jokes, insults, and some microaggressions based on my race. And, I will say that sometime in May, with all the news of Asian hate crimes in the U.S. that, started with the shooting in Atlanta this spring and transpiring to hate crimes that occur close to and in Indiana, I question my place as an Asian in the U.S. I remember just sitting in a basement with some of my closest friends and noticing that I was the only Asian in the room and just thinking to myself, do I belong here? And I left very early that night from the basement around 9:30 p.m., which kind of shocked everyone and confused them all because I left but didn't say anything to say to explain why I left. And usually I'm there with all my friends and the deep into the night and just hang out with them, So I went home by myself and I just felt, really emotionally and mentally drained, confused, etc. And honestly, it was just so much on me on that one night. And though I can never feel the direct effects of a hate crime, I felt the indirect of Asian hate crimes in the spring on that one day. But yeah, how about the rest of y'all? Have y'all had experiences close to mine or those related to the recent hate crimes at all?
Yeah, Kang, I'm actually glad that you brought up your story and your experiences because I also share a similar story with growing up in I grew up in a community that didn't have a lot of Asians. And so I was always, the one to hear all the jokes and all the little microaggressions. And I never really recognized at the time that they were offensive. I guess I kind of just played it off oh, haha, yeah, that's funny. But obviously it could just be me trying to fit in, and play around and joke around. But I do remember when the whole incident happened this past spring, I felt very on edge and paranoid going out on campus because I go to a predominantly white school. And so a lot of my peers, a lot of my classmates, everyone around me is white. And so I just have this idea in my head that everyone's out to get me or something because of all the Stop Asian Hate stuff and all the hate crimes that have been going on. And so on campus, fortunately, the Multicultural Center is pretty supportive of the the BIPOC community, and so they have held events and a candlelight vigil to help with this, and also help sponsor a protest with that happened in Lincoln. And so I was fortunate enough to also be one of the speakers for the vigil, since obviously this is a topic that I'm very passionate about, and I was able to speak my story and my words during it. But even with all the help that the Multicultural Center and the university has done, I still feel like there's been some insensitivity and microaggression still going on with campus, around campus, because one of my friends has told me that in one of her classes, ever since the whole hate crime thing has happened, one of her teachers asked her to talk about it and her experiences out of the blue, which
Yikes.
Yeah, big yikes. And I don't think that's appropriate to talk about, especially when someone is going through something so traumatic and it really hits you deep and is very personal, you're not ready to talk about things like that, and you need time to heal. You need time to heal. And so I just like, it just doesn't sit right with me that people try to use your experiences or try to like, what's the word, like tokenism, or like, I don't know, just trying to relate to your experiences by asking you about it when, you know, you're not ready.
Definitely, I echo what you had said. Being PWIs in the Midwest has made it more isolating and difficult for minoritized identities to feel that support, since a lot of the racism and jokes against Asian and those that come from Asian descent are just so normalized that like you're being told that it's a joke and such, and to take it. But when those jokes progress to violence, then it's just like it could have been disrupted if at the beginning it was said to be wrong. And definitely like what you said about how rough it has been listening to these incidents and being on edge about it, because when I remember hearing about the massage parlor deaths, and then like it, like I remember hearing about it at night and then just letting it soak in the next day, and then it just hit me like these are people within our communities and other communities that are just trying to make ends meet, and unfortunately they are paying the cost for someone else's internal struggles that was so unnecessary, that could have been completely preventable by just not doing what they did. And I remember being like so distraught about it and just not doing some assignments because I was just, you know, feeling kind of weird. And in my grad classes, we had held space to talk about the different times, the different hardships that were going on and express how we were feeling. And being one of two Asian Americans within my cohort can sometimes be isolating, but it's nice that there's other students that hold minoritized identities within my space that have gone through different experiences, different things about racial trauma, that they have empathy and they're able to understand and listen and be there to support, instead of just being like sympathetic, like, oh, that sucks, sorry you're going through that and stuff. So I really think that being empathetic in these times of hardship is really important as communities, minoritized communities, to support one another. And I now proceed a lot differently. Like I moved to Chicago almost a year ago, and it's really diversity, which I do love, but I'm always like kind of on edge. I mentioned to my friend who I hang out with a lot that whenever we go to a restaurant or something, I'm always sitting facing the door just to make sure I can see who's coming in, and trying to have that escape plan in my mind, which sucks that we have to kind of think of that and such in like our country. And then also how I proceed in public. I've been taking transit a lot more and taking the subway, and my friends can visit. I always have my back facing the wall because I have a really big fear that someone can just decide to push you in and such. And like it's crazy that like people have to think about these and have an escape plan and be kind of paranoid in public just because someone else might see you, and because they don't agree with your identity, they might punish you for that. So definitely a time now where kind of proceeding more cautiously in public and just trying to think about yourself and your escape plan, and kind of interesting in the worst way.
Yeah, no, I agree. Just to backtrack just a little bit, like, I noticed you talked about, Elizabeth, about the massage parlor deaths. And like, I remember just my reaction to it was obviously just shock about what just happened. And then I remember the next day I was just angry at, I think it was like the police officer who, for some reason, just said that the shooter had a bad day. I got so mad about that. I was like no one's gonna have a bad day and decide to go kill others. Like if I'm having a bad day, I'm gonna vent and be stressed, but I'm not gonna go kill anyone. I just thought that was inconsiderate of the police officer to do that. But yeah, that was just was a whirlwind of emotions for me that day in terms of what happened, the events that happened after, and whatnot. Yeah. Just to quickly talk. So we have a viewer that actually has a question related to our topic about stopping Asian hate, and his question, or their question was, I identify as an Asian American and wish I could do more to stop Asian hate. There are times when I felt helpless in protecting my community members locally and nationally. And what are some meaningful and impactful ways I can go about protecting others against hate? So do y'all want to take a stab at this question at all?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not like a part of the Asian American community at all, and so, but when like Asian hate crimes did start to rise, the Global Asian Studies Department and the Asian American Resource and Cultural Center at my school, UIC, they started doing this thing where if an Asian American student felt unsafe on campus, whether that be like after school or something, you could like reach out to somebody and ask for like support, like, oh, could you walk me to like this bus stop? And like, I don't know, there was a circle that was just like existed to support like Asian American students who felt vulnerable, like moving around campus and stuff like that. And so I think like even something as little as like, hey, do you want like a walking buddy to like the train stop, or like, you know, like little stuff like that does make a difference in terms of like helping others feel protected. So yeah, maybe something like that. Or
Yeah, I think like with my school, we kind of have something similar in like terms of like the school providing support for students. Because I know the Multicultural Center has like a hotline number or like a reporting system where you can report incidents of like hate crimes and stuff. I don't know the exact details of like what exactly they'll do about it, like if they'll like do a police report or something. But I know like having and offering that system does help in a way. But to answer the question, I know like it can be hard to think of ways to like directly help and protect the community members. Like you can't protect every single person in the community, but I think something you can do is show your support. And an example of this would be attending events such as protests, rallies, vigils, stuff like that. And not just as an Asian American, but even like an individual wanting to support the Asian community. Because I remember during the candlelight vigil that I was a speaker at, there were a lot of non-Asians there, like surprisingly a good amount of numbers that like I didn't expect. And I know that the Asian population at UNL isn't that big. So like I wasn't expecting a lot of people in general, but I felt like there was a good amount of people that showed up and supported. So it felt really good to me knowing that there are other, you know, races and people of color that that came to the vigil to support us. So just like showing up to events like that would be really helpful.
Yeah, going off of what Jennifer said earlier, I think, you know, when we hear about these things, we want to try to go above and beyond and try to like make moves like nationally and stuff. But I think that can cause you to burn out quickly and like feel kind of those feelings of helplessness because, like you said, you can't help everyone. So try to realize your limit and then start small and then try to work your way instead of trying to help every single person because you can't. And if you set that expectation, it can lead to like feelings of disappointment if you like you're not making an impact. So definitely check to see if there's anything in your local communities and instead of like trying to start something new, see what might already be existing. There's a lot of grassroots organizations and already existing programs that have been created by other communities of color to address hate, for community safety and such. And also another way to like just stop and hopefully prevent hate is just the start point is just educating yourself on what's been going on and stuff and finding ways to disrupt that. So what I mean, like hopping in and not being a bystander when you notice an incident of crime, how to properly de-escalate situations or hopefully neutralize situations, how to bring the affected persons away from harm and such. So there, hopefully there's like resources out there. A lot have been posted after all these incidents to kind of equip our members and other members of different communities to try to intervene when things like this happen. And hopefully just by educating yourself, finding ways that will be effective. So you're not doing more harm than good when you might be faced, hopefully never faced with seeing these incidents.
Yeah, I agree with what everyone said in terms of, especially what Liz about looking in your local community. You don't have to start anything brand new, but like look and see what's existing and educating yourself. To answer this question, I think you don't have to go extremely, like Elizabeth said, you don't have to go nationally, be like a huge voice or like a public voice for this. You know, doing something as simple as you know, talking to your friends and saying that like you're there for them and through this time if you need anything. Like it might seem extremely like little of an like not that big of an impact, but you never know. Like it could be something that's extremely impactful for anyone. For example, I remember when the incident at the massage parlor happened. I was the logistics director for LS, and I remember talking to my committee, And I remember talking to them saying that, like, if they need time off for anything, if they needed to speak to me, I was there for them to talk to about like anything they wanted. And I remember I thought it was like a very small impact. I didn't really think it would get to them. But I remember a few days later, one of my community members reached out to me, and like she like thanked me and said like my gesture was extremely sincere. So looking back then, like I thought that I had a big impact on her to get through what just happened recently down in Atlanta. So yeah, it doesn't have to be something as big as going out in the community and doing something extremely big. It can be as simple as going to your friends personally and saying, I got your back. We can get through this together. But yeah. All right. So a brief halftime break, for us to hydrate, collect our thoughts on the topic so far, pet our cats, whatever. So we will see you guys in a few minutes. See you soon.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back. I hope y'all had a good rest, a good drink of water from halftime. But without further ado, we are going to get right into the podcast again. I know we had a very deep, emotional talk and conversation about Stop Asian Hate and hate crimes. But for this second half of the podcast, we're going to be talking a little bit more about anti-Blackness within our communities. So to start off with anti-Blackness, we're gonna be talking about why anti-Blackness exists in the Asian community and what does it look like. I think something we can probably start off with is Black stereotypes and how anti-Blackness looks like within our communities. So I know within the Asian community, there are a lot of stereotypes that come from being around and noticing things, the media, such as Black people being labeled as ghetto, violent, dangerous, being rude and disrespectful. Does anyone have any experiences or have seen things and stereotypes like that on media, in the media?
Yeah, I would say I've definitely seen especially in movies and stuff, Black characters are always characterized a particular way. They're usually always loud characters or rambunctious characters, or Black women are tend to be sassy. It's always the same characterization and iconography over and over again. And definitely when that's all you see, and if you're not a part of that community, you start you you can believe you start to believe that. And so as a kid, all of those stereotypes about Black folks were definitely my own parents validated those to me, and I believed them to a certain extent, but that was just out of ignorance for sure.
Yeah, definitely what Maya had said about just being labeled as sassy and such, and these characters being the token Black character and the way they interact, the way they talk, the things they say that are very stereotypical. And then also other stereotypes like Black women being labeled the welfare queen and profiting off of government help while they don't need it, or they're scamming the system and such. And it's just all these different harmful stereotypes that people listen to and they absorb, and then they carry on these ideas, and then they start to have a blanket labeling whenever they do interact with folks that that are Black and such.
Yeah, this is not technically in the media, and it's technically not in our communities, but it could definitely manifest in any community. But I remember a story about a medical school resident, I guess a resident, a subspecialty teacher. She was in emergency medicine with two other residents, and there was a African-American boy, I think a teenager, who was shot and was sent to the ER to be operated on. And these residents, they found two cells of him, and after just staring at the body and just realizing what just happened, one of the residents was saying maybe he was on call, on call as a doctor. And then two of them laughed, and the other one was no, I've seen this cell phone before, it's something on the wire. So it was just reading what happened there was how they stereotyped person as not smart enough to be a doctor, as someone who was in a drug deal gone wrong, or some accident that got him shot was just like I could see how that would easily manifest in our communities, and how like anti-blackness is not just apparent in like Asian communities, but it can be apparent in any other community.
Also, just like going back to what Elizabeth was saying about the stereotype that like Black folks abuse like government assistance. There's definitely like, especially, okay, there's like this weird like dynamic between Black folks and other immigrant groups, like for example, like Mexicans, and just other immigrant groups that like have this idea that like they work really hard. Like Mexicans are characterized to be like really hard workers, but then like Mexican folks, they think that like Black folks are lazy in compared to them. So then that's why there's also that like tension, like that racial tension between like Hispanic folks and like Hispanic immigrants and Black people, and why like Hispanic immigrants like don't like Black people sometimes is because they think that like, oh, these people aren't working as hard as them, or like I don't know. It's definitely like a misunderstanding and ignorance, but that also exists, and it's just a huge myth.
Yeah, no, I'm so glad that you brought that up, because that was basically what I was going to talk about next, which is the model minority myth. And so like the model minority myth, for those who don't know, it's kind of like this idea that I guess highlights and spotlights Asians because they're deemed as being successful and hardworking and, very like academic, smart, whatever. But because they are deemed as successful, it downplays the other minority groups and makes it seem like they're not as hardworking, or like not as smart and not as successful as Asians. And so this kind of puts Asians and like the Asian community and the Black community against each other, because they're kind of like fighting for this like superiority type of thing. And just the myth in general just puts a really big divide on racial communities and puts the minority groups against each other. So with what Maya said about the Hispanic community, same goes with that too. It's just putting each minority group against each other and comparing them with each other, which really isn't good. But I guess on the topic of stereotypes again, I think something that we should all be aware of, and probably might have seen like in the media and on social media especially, is cultural appropriation. Does anyone have any ideas or have seen anything about or know anything about cultural appropriation?
Yeah, so like cultural appropriation can be taking part of a culture's maybe dress, attire, cultural garb, and misrepresenting them in a disrespectful way. So this can be seen like through the use of language, through wearing culture garb to like a random party just because you think it's cool, and so instead of acknowledging like where it's coming from, because there is a very stark contrast between cultural appreciation versus cultural appropriation, and I don't think that it's like a thin line. I think that there can be very different instances where you can clearly see where people are coming with the intention to disrespect ignorantly, whether they know it or not, or people going to something where they've educated themselves, they've received blessings, or like they're in a space where it's the norm. So like if I were to go to some a wedding of someone that identifies a different culture than me, and they're inviting me into this space and educating me and then providing me with like cultural attire to celebrate alongside with them, that would be me appreciating it. Whereas if I just bought it online on eBay and thought it looked cool and wore it around, then that'd be like cultural appropriation. So a few ways we can see it in our community and other communities when they're appropriating from the Black community is like having locks and braids in your hair in inappropriate ways and such, because then this is not something that's historical to us. There's a lot of history behind why they braided their hair, why they have this. And when non-Black people do put locks in their hair and it starts to fall out, then they realize, it's not meant for them.
Yeah, and I think like cultural appropriation definitely manifests in ways that people might not realize. So such as like the ABG like character archetype or like African American Vernacular English, which is also known as AAVE, when that's basically just like all the slang terms that we use, that we think are like funny and that we got off of TikTok. And I guess like non-Black folks have been stealing Black language for a long time. And I, as someone who's like a Gen Z person that does use like slang, I think about that a lot. And I've always like, I don't know, I've always had like a somewhat of an issue with like the ABG characterization, like the fake nails and lashes and all that stuff, because I feel like Black and brown women were definitely like the blueprint of that fashion style. And for the longest time, Black and brown women had worn long nails, lashes, edges laid, stuff like that, had tattoos and stuff like that. And, those were things that Black and brown women got shamed for and like were considered ghetto for adorning. But I think it's really interesting that that's like a total 180 now. And when like Black POC adopt those styles, it's like cool and like stylish and stuff like that. So I think that's really interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's where like the whole anti-blackness thing comes from, is because like the whole culture of like ABG with like the hair, the nails, the lashes and everything like that, people that use and borrow that culture, they don't realize or they don't understand where it comes from, and it kind of like puts a little disrespect on like the Black culture, because that's where it came from and that's what they have done in the past and have gotten shamed for it. But aside from that, something I did want to ask and I'm kind of curious about is the AAVE thing, because I know that AAVE is kind of like a dialect or like a way of talking that a lot of Black people use. And I have heard about things where AAVE is kind of considered like ghetto talk or like Black scent. But I have also heard of, non like, I guess like non Black people using AAVE, but not in a sense where they've learned from social media or like they've picked it up from other people, but more like they grew up in a community that had a lot of Black people and, grow up with that type of, speech. And so I'm wondering, what is appropriate? Like, is it appropriate? Would it be considered Black scent? Like, what exactly is that?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I honestly I don't know the answer to that, but I've heard that discourse a lot. Like, oh, this person was like raised in the hood, so like it's okay for them to talk like that, or it's okay for them to use the N-word. And I think there's like a fine line. I think like you have to, like, let's say, okay, you did grow up in that environment. I think there's also, once you get to a certain age and maturity, there's like you have to be self-accountable and like rethink about your language. And I don't think you have to like change the way you talk completely, but like, for example, if you're a non-Black POC that like was raised in the hood and you're still using the N-word, like it's about time that you kind of like unlearn some of that. And then also like, I think, okay, here's a prime example of like, there's a Asian American celebrity. She's quite popular now and she goes by the name of Aquafina. And she started off as a rapper and now she's like an actress, and she's from like the Bronx, or I don't know, she's from New York. I don't know exactly where, but she does kind of have a Black scent. And for the longest time throughout her rap career as like somebody from New York, she was definitely utilizing that. And that definitely did like prompt and amplify her success, I think, to some extent. But as soon as she started professionally acting and making movies and stuff like that, you can tell like the evolution, like how she starts to drop that Black scent. Now she's picking up these more professional roles, and she is dropping her New York accent because she can, and I think that's really important to think about, because a lot of people who like actually talk that way and like Black folks, they can't just like drop something, when it's like time they want to be professional, and like when they want to be taken seriously, they like can't just drop something that's a part of their identity. And so I think it's really interesting how Awkwafina does that. And I think a lot of people, she has a lot of fans, but a lot of people also, criticize her for that. Like why now that she's starting to do more serious roles, she's like dropped, like she's, you guys know what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, definitely agree. It's like for Black folks, they have to code switch and speak more like professional or white, or like how people say it, just so that they can get the same things that other people can. Whereas she has the luxury of being able to drop it for fun and stuff. So it's like an accessory to her that she can put down, that she can take off, or a costume. Whereas for others, like it's something that they have to do just to earn respect and to be seen as a human. So I think that it's appropriation when you're doing it just for fun, to be cool, to sound urban, because it's something fresh and hip and stuff. When other people have to go out of their way to sound different just so that they can be seen as human. So there is a stark contrast of that, like what you can and can't do because it's for fun for you and something you can take off, and you won't live as a Black person. Like when you go into the store, you're not going to be followed around. Whereas these people have this reality that they're going to face forever, and something that they can't just take off as easily as you can. So I think that's worth to point out, like how language is so important, and how like, you see like Stan Twitter saying like all these things, and how it's like they use a lot of AAVE. So it's just really important to keep in mind that language is powerful and it can be used to bring people together, but also separate and divide us.
Yeah, thank you for you definitely said that more eloquently than me, Elizabeth. So thank you for picking back off of what I was saying. But I think like we wanna talk about like, why are we talking about this? Why is anti-Blackness important? And I think as people of color, we all experience racism, but many people might not realize that like systemic racism, which is like institutionalized racism, like basically how laws are embedded in our society and how our society functions as a whole, is like the foundation is racist. But basically, like many people may not realize that anti-Blackness is like the core of contemporary racial discourse, and how racism manifests for other races, like us. And so like, like non-Black people, they can't really fight for racial equity of like their own race without also fighting for Black liberation. So for example, like if you're gonna fight for stop API hate, you also have to be fighting for Black liberation at the same time, because they are connected. Such as like, when Jennifer was talking about the model minority myth, like if you want to combat the model minority myth, you have to also uplift Black people as well, and break like the stereotypes that are attached to Black people, as well as break the stereotypes that are attached to your own people. So that's kind of like why it's important to talk about.
Yeah, and it's important to start the conversation because anti-Blackness, like Kang said earlier, is global. It is something that exists and stuff, and it's taught. Like we are not born anti-Black. It's something that has been ingrained in our culture through the words of our family, our communities, our parents, media messages, and such. So it's important to learn about it, acknowledge it, address it, and disrupt it however you can. So like talking about like nail salons being anti-Black, I had went to NCORE, the National Conference on Race and Education, something. I cannot remember the full acronym, but there was so many uplifting, empowering workshops that inspired me going to my second year of college to start a workshop talking about anti-Blackness. So that's just some small way that I wanted to start the conversation within my local community. So I presented it at different conferences and such to our overall Midwest or North American community and such. So that's just one way just to address it and stuff, because it being so global and stuff, like Maya said, is important to address. That's part of systemic racism. So what can you research and stuff, since these are a lot of different terms you might be hearing for the first time, or you might be hearing as like different protests and stuff come up, and there are a lot of different terminology and stuff. So it's definitely okay if you don't know everything, but there are resources out there. So one thing I definitely recommend looking into is looking into critical race theory, or crit CRT. It's also it's an important intellectual framework regarding race and racism that is actually being attacked in different states' educational systems and such. So those were just a few reasons like how anti-blackness is important to talk about, whether it can be having conversation with your friends, your family members, your local student organizations, your school, your classroom, even. Like it starts somewhere and such, no matter what scale. And then with that, just wanted to bring up just like how anti-blackness like manifests in or started in my own personal experience. So growing up, I noticed it a lot in the nail salon and stuff, the way my family members interacted with Black customers versus white customers and other customers. And it was, just really annoying to see this. And like, I'm from Georgia, I'm from Atlanta, and then my family moved to Cleveland. So we lived in various spaces that were predominantly Black, predominantly white, and just an overall mix. And just like having these conversations would be so frustrating with my family and stuff, because they the danger of just a single story, that's a TED talk about how it's just they will carry this one single story that they have and apply it as like a blanket statement over everyone. So it's really important to try to disrupt that. So it was frustrating with my family. So I was like, okay, well, where can I focus my energy on impressionable people? So I focus more on my younger cousins, such that are, taking in these messages, listening, and starting to disrupt those messages that they learned from their family, and to just help them understand how important it is to think about diversity, inclusion, and equity. So that's my personal experience, but just curious on the rest of y'all. Like, when did you first started noticing anti-blackness, like being a thing, and what maybe your first or few experiences with experiencing anti-blackness?
Yeah, personally for me, I've experienced anti-blackness in my own household, mostly with my mom. I remember last spring, my brother David, he told me about something like insane that my mom said about African Americans. I don't remember the exact thing she said exactly. I do remember like my brother and I were talking to my mom about it, and however, whatever like stereotypes or any implicit or even explicit biases that she had against Black people, like they just weren't true at all. And I believe she's gotten better about her acknowledging her biases and making an effort to, I guess, repress them. Not repress them, but understand them and learn, educate herself on them. But I remember like moving into my new apartment here in Indy. She asked me if there are any African Americans in the complex or in the neighborhood because she feared for my safety. I was just pissed at her because like I was like why would you even think of that? And just looking back, I think it's just because of I want to say it's because of her implicit bias against African Americans. And my brothers and I, we've been harping on her about racial stereotypes since COVID started. So hopefully these like same outbursts don't occur anymore because we're trying to change her implicit intentional views towards African Americans, because it's one thing to change a person's actions or your own actions, but it's a completely different thing to change your own personal implicit or explicit views.
Yeah, thank you for sharing, Kang. And I think what my first experience, like the first time I noticed anti-blackness was I was a kid, and my mom would describe hearing my mom describe like Black people and Black neighborhoods as ghetto. We live in Chicago, and there's a lot of neighborhoods that are labeled ghetto, and I learned that. I was like, okay, so this neighborhood is ghetto, this neighborhood is ghetto, this neighborhood is ghetto, but I never asked myself, why is my mom why is this neighborhood ghetto? Like, what makes it ghetto? So I think I started to like really think about that, honestly, just a couple years ago. And also just like my mom definitely, she has a preference for me to immerse myself in like predominantly white spaces and make white friends. So I remember like when I was growing up in summer camp, she signed me up for like the summer camp at like Chicago Park Districts. She signed me up at summer camps in like white neighborhoods, and I think she, like, the first time I went to summer camp, she signed me up in like a Black and brown neighborhood, and then she realized that like, oh my gosh, there's so many Black kids in your camp. And then from years on after that, she signed me up for camp in like white neighborhoods, and I didn't really realize that change until I got a little older. But that was like my first experience with that. So I want to bring up another question, another anonymous question. And so this person asked us, I want to support other communities, but I feel that I'm not knowledgeable enough of their history to be a good advocate. So what are ways that I can go about supporting communities that I may not be a member of? And I'll start because I am a Mexican American person, but a lot of you guys who know me, you guys know me from VSA, or you guys know me from AKD5, or like predominantly Asian spaces. And so what I do as somebody who's not a part of that community, but I'm still like immersing myself in that community, I take the time to like actually educate myself and learn about it, because I find that so rewarding to learn about other groups of people who are not your own. So for example, when UVSA-Midwest or when VSA does like workshops about like Vietnamese history or like Vietnamese immigration history or the Vietnam War, like I make time to go to those because I want to learn about those. And if I'm going to be a part of the space, like I should know about that history. And honestly, just being a good ally and being a good listener. So a lot of times when I, take up leadership roles in the space, I make sure that I am like also making space for the people that the space is meant for, So I just think, just being accountable of like how much space you're taking up in a certain community. So yeah.
Yeah, I want to go off of what Maya said, like as you're educating yourselves and gaining more knowledge about the history of oppression and racism in for these communities and stuff, try not to be like, you know what, I don't see this around me, I'm going to start my own organization, because chances are there probably are so many organizations that are already doing the work that you think might be something that you're like starting off out of nowhere. So try not to like you said, take too much space, but also just be an ally, be a co-conspirator, an accomplice, someone that is willing to support these folks, and then let them know that you're there for them. And don't try to, be on the forefront. Don't even try to be like, I want to be recognized for this, I want to post about this, I want people to know that I was here, because that doesn't do anything but just make you look like you're doing it for others and stuff. Do support people because you believe in them, you support them as a human and their right to be at peace and living as a human and stuff, not because you're expecting anything in return. So like finding it transactional is like really, I think, improper and stuff. So when you're supporting these communities, be very intentional with how you move. Make sure that you're listening, be open-minded, be a good listener and active listener, because they know their needs and such. So it's how do you uplift them? Because I find it annoying when people are like silence voices, or like these voices that are so quiet and stuff. I'm like, uplift them and stuff in their voices instead of just speaking for them, because you may not be able to speak for their pain, for their history and such. So just be there to amplify the voices and such. And with that, as we talk about communities and stuff, like safety is super, super important. So like I said, like checking out local resources that might be already existing in your area, different organizations that are doing things to support vulnerable populations, such as after a lot of the Asian hate incidents are happening, I've seen some campaigns donating self-defense items for these populations. And then also, like Maya had said, volunteering to escort people during their daily tasks so that they feel safe and that they're not alone, since not everyone is able to protect themselves. So having these conversations in your local communities is really important, and on the UVSA-Midwest. And we want to ensure that, we're creating policies that are anti-racist, anti-discriminatory, and just overall having a zero tolerance policy to not allow this behavior within our spaces. And these are just words on paper. So it's really on what actions we are taking to make sure that we can hopefully eradicate these incidents from happening within our space. So like if your school or community offers DEI or diversity, equity, inclusion training to better equip yourself for what to do when these incidents happen, so that you're not a bystander. And if you are trying to intervene, you do it safely so that hopefully no one gets hurt in the process. So I always think that it's better to be more proactive instead of reactive in these incidents, so that you can hopefully try to prevent anything from going too far and such. And then another tip I have is just try to see if there's alternative resources that can be helpful that don't include the increased involvement and presence of police and law enforcement, because they can also make people more on edge and can sometimes even cause more harm. So finding ways that are alternative that can be helpful and supportive without having to include people that might escalate the situation.
Yeah, and I also think UVSA-Midwest does a really good job with promoting community safety as well, because I know our organization has, like you said, like the screening system. So before we like let people into our space, we're like looking out for the people that are in our community by making sure that the new people we let into our space are like actually credible and trustworthy. And then also just like the Civic Engagement Committee, I think does a really good job. The UVSA Midwest Civic Engagement Committee does a really good job with like promoting community safety by offering a safe space for community members to like debrief of like about, you know, serious situations or social justice issues. And I think if you're a part of a different organization, you can definitely like start implementing those community safety techniques in like your own spaces as well, because it works really well for our space, I think.
Yeah, and then to talk a little more about community safety, like I remember I was talking to some of my friends at IU about community safety within local VSA, and we were thinking about just policies and stuff like that, and just rules. And then I remember just thinking about like it doesn't have to it doesn't have to be just about having set guidelines in place. It can be honestly like I said previously, like a few long time ago in this episode, but just being out there, looking at other like that way you can build your own community while also keeping others safe at the same time. Just like checking in on your members, checking in on your friends within VSA, within your other friend groups, just building that sense of friendship, family, and keeping one another accountable, and just overall, like I said, just checking on people like from time to time is like another good way to ensure community safety. But yeah, for the sake of time, we actually cannot go in depth about all the resources that we have for this episode specifically. But for just a little bit of a preview, do include those that involve anti-blackness and Asian communities and educating yourself on that topic. The really cool implicit bias test from Harvard that I actually took yesterday. I encourage you all to take that test. It's a really cool test. And a list of novels I found that are aimed at stopping anti-Asian hate. I found two of them. I think one of them was like Crying in H Mart. I'm not sure if y'all ever heard about that novel, but it's a one novel that I really liked and I might order on Amazon. So yeah, those are just a few of the resources we have. Depending on if you're on YouTube or Spotify, YouTube, they'll be in our description. And then if you're on Spotify, go check out our Instagram, where we'll have a link tree for our resources for this episode, along with the other episodes that we have had.
With that being said, because we are wrapping up towards the end of this podcast, it is now time for the CoSR kudos. So we have 3 CoSR kudos, and the first one actually goes to a group of people. And their names are David Tran, James Nguyen, and Don Hua. And the person shouting them out wants to shout them out for representing Midwest at UNAFSA as family leaders. Y'all are inspiring. Yes, we love to see it. We love to see it.
Yes. Oh my gosh. I went to UNASA this past weekend, and let me just say they were really amazing, seeing their involvement and seeing their like charisma as family leaders. It was so awesome. Good job, guys.
Yay. And our second kudo goes out to Tyson Ban for being an active and inspiring leader within UVSA Midwest. Your passion is second to none. Yay, Tyson. Yay. And our last kudo goes out to Illinois VSAs. And the person shouting them out wants to shout them out for their beach day because it looked so cool. I really wanted to go, but I had to go to a separate function. We'll try to hang out with y'all next time. Heart.
Oh my gosh. Blushing. Okay. Yeah, our beach day was so fun. Awesome.
Bet. All right. Before we end our episode, we just want to give huge thanks to Elizabeth for taking the time out of her busy schedule to come on to this podcast for this episode and providing a lot of insight of our topic. And then also we want to give a quick shout out to the rest of the CoStaRt cohort who helped on this episode. We want to thank Molly for her wizardry and graphics and marketing, especially for our really cool virtual backgrounds we have of our which I think is awesome as hell. Program language. And then David for always providing help whenever in our project. And then also Ethan for helping out in captioning, editing, and just supporting us along the way.
Yes, I love our team. And That's a wrap. So I just want to thank everyone for tuning in. If you're listening, thank you so much for tuning into the third episode of Let's Go Start a Conversation. And next time for our fourth episode, we're going to be talking about having solidarity and unity in other people's communities. So, until then, have a great rest of your summer before school starts. Thank you, everybody, and we will see you soon.
Woo! Bye, Lauren.
Bye.
Bye.